Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about our next entry for our 2020 Fantasy Football Player Profile Series. We're talking about Allen Robinson, wide receiver of the Chicago Bears. And sure, Allen Robinson was a #1 wide receiver in 2019, but prior to that, he had a lot of trials and tribulations getting to 2019. I mean, in 2015, Allen Robinson was at the peak of his career. 1,400 receiving yards, 14 receiving touchdowns inside of that Jacksonville Jaguars garbage time offense with Blake Bortles. He had established himself in his second year in the NFL in 2015. But after that, it was all downhill. Had a rough 2016 season, had an ACL injury in 2017. In 2018 with the Chicago Bears, still had a lot of injuries bugging him, missed nearly a quarter of the season, and really couldn't find a stride within the offense. But in 2019, that all changed. We really found ourselves with the resurgence and revitalization of a guy like Allen Robinson, because not only was he given the opportunity, but his talent continued to spread through and prove to everybody why this guy should be in the conversation of continuously being a wide receiver one. And despite all the quarterback mumbles and rumors and who's going to start, I think it doesn't really matter. I still find Allen Robinson as a great prospect, and I think a lot of people are kind of letting him slide on draft boards because of the uncertainty of the quarterback position with the Chicago Bears, which I'm not really worried about. So we're going to talk about that. We'll talk about the statistics backing just how effective and efficient he was last season and why you should potentially be targeting him in your 2020 fantasy football drafts. Now, before we begin today's video, let me remind all of you, Andrew Kiorkof's 2020 fantasy football draft guide is now available. Go down to the description of the video. You can find more information regarding that. You go click on the YouTube link. It's pretty much a link, me talking about everything that I'm producing outside of the YouTube channel as extra content over at my Patreon channel, and where you can find my draft guide, whether it's on Patreon or at the website. So thank you again for going and checking that out. Outside of that, subscribe to the channel for more fantasy football content. Will be coming your way this entire offseason. Make sure you click the bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content. Again, we're talking about Allen Robinson today because he was absolutely incredible in 2019. He finishes the number 11 overall wide receiver in a half PPR format because the opportunity and the productivity was absolutely there. I mean, the opportunity of 154 targets in 16 weeks, nearly 10 targets a game. That number anybody would take. 154 targets leading to 98 receptions, 1,147 receiving yards, 7 receiving touchdowns, which is great, and then 205.9 fantasy points. I mean, early in the 2019 season, I think the Chicago Bears were still trying to find themselves. Mitchell Trubisky was struggling heavily, and sure, a little bit of that, playoff hangover that they had in 2018 with the missed field goal and all that kind of jazz, that kind of carried over for the early half of the Chicago Bears 2019 season. But eventually they found stride, and Allen Robinson finally took over as the #1 threat of this offense and proved that. I mean, in weeks 12 through 17, when this team was fully in stride and dominating defenses, Allen Robinson was scoring 16 fantasy points per game in a half PPR format and averaging 11 targets per game. Again, this double-digit targets per game theme is incredible, and we're going to probably continue to see that in 2020 for Allen Robinson, and that's a promising sign because last season, in the 10 games in which he had just over 8 targets per game, he averaged 16.63 fantasy points per game. Well, that alone gets me excited about Allen Robinson. The fact that there really isn't any other wide receiver threats or receiving threats that are going to take targets away from him, I'm not really worried about it. But I think a lot of you guys perhaps are on the fringe. You're thinking, is Allen Robinson a dependable enough receiving option? Do I want to rely upon a guy that is involved with Mitchell Trubisky in the Bears offense, in an offense that may not be wanting to pass the ball as much? I think that kind of thought process is it's not something that I subscribe to. I really think that despite the quarterback, these wide receivers, if given the ample opportunity, are going to succeed majority of the time. Again, he's one of the most dynamic wide receivers and can do everything and can play anywhere on the field, whether it's outside, on a deep route, in the slot, short routes. He dominates all over the field, and he proved that last year. I mean, you just got to go watch a little bit of Allen Robinson's highlights from last year. He was making defenders look silly, honestly. And to be honest, he's going to continue that in 2020. I mean, last year, he played 93.95% of the snap share. He never came off the field. That's why the targets were there. That's why his productivity was there. And he's a strong, big-bodied wide receiver that can block downfield. On top of it, had 24.44% of the target share of his offense. Last season, in the division, playing against the NFC South, averaged 13.82 fantasy points per game. Sure, that division has decent corners. Darius Slay gone definitely makes a huge difference. The Vikings secondary, pretty much beat up. They have 2 good safeties. Outside of that, the cornerback position the last couple of years been quite a mess. Overall, I think he can continue to exploit these defenses and have great, games in that 6-game stretch of playing within his own division. But opportunity is key. Again, getting 10 targets a game, unbelievable, but also getting opportunity in the red zone. Last season, Allen Robinson had the 3rd most targets in the red zone amongst all receiving options with 20 red zone targets, leading to 11 receptions and 5 receiving touchdowns down in the red zone. All in all, Allen Robinson, even with the quarterback questions, is Trubisky going to be great? Is it going to be Foles? He still had effective, accurate passing. 154 targets. 101 of them were deemed catchable. Sure, he dropped 3 passes last season. But if you can get 100 catchable balls a year as any wide receiver, I don't think you're ever going to be able to skip out on that. If I guarantee that AJ Green's going to have 100 catchable balls this year, I'm 100% certain he'll be a wide receiver 1. But you can't guarantee that. But within this offense, as the number 1 wide receiver, as a guy that is continuously proving to be one of the best wide receivers in the league all around the field, I just continue to grow confidence in drafting a guy like Allen Robinson. I mean, like I mentioned before, he's a dynamic wide receiver. You can move him around all over the field. And last season, he played 259 total snaps in the slot position. He had 63 targets, 47 receptions for 560 yards, and 4 of his 7 receiving touchdowns from the slot position. You may be thinking, Andrew, doesn't Anthony Miller play in the slot? Yeah, he does. And it does not matter because they're going to move their best player in the position where they want to feed the ball. Allen Robinson goes where the ball is going, typically. And it's always going to typically go in his direction, and it's not an accident. It's designed that way. On top of it, he had 29 deep target passes. I mean, those are targets that are 20 plus yards last season. Sure, of the 29 targets, only caught 14 of them, but a 50% catch rate on deep pass targets, a great number because 2 of his touchdowns came from there, and 393 of his total yards came from there. Overall, Allen Robinson is a dynamic wide receiver. He's a guy that really can't be stopped all around the field. And despite the quarterback play, I really do have confidence in him going into the 2020 fantasy football season. And despite the stigma of everyone thinking I don't want my wide receiver 1 to be associated with a bad quarterback, I want my guy to be associated with an Aaron Rodgers or a Drew Brees or a Tom Brady or a Deshaun Watson. I want my guys to be associated with the top tier quarterbacks. And I get that. But the opportunity is still going to reign. And it's going to continue to, be an influx of fantasy points for people who have Allen Robinson. I mean, last season, Devontae Parker was a monster. And did Ryan Fitzpatrick help him become that monster? Or did he impede him from becoming that monster? Because last time I checked, a guy like Josh Rosen was stopping that productivity. And Ryan Fitzpatrick unleashed it. And a lot of people call Mitchell Trubisky Blake Bortles Jr., but to be honest, if you can go ahead and have Blake Bortles Jr. produce another one of these 2015 years with a guy like Allen Robinson, then we're talking about a wide receiver 1 that cannot be ignored in your upcoming drafts. And I'm sure he's going to slide off the draft boards. He's going to potentially be a guy that's drafted in that wide receiver 2 conversation. And I don't mind that. I don't mind that at all because I really do think that a guy like Allen Robinson can be a fantastic wide receiver going into the 2020 fantasy football season. Kind of missing around here. But either way, let me know what you guys think. I think Allen Robinson is in line for a great season. I think, once again, he's proven to everybody what kind of talent he has. And if the opportunity is there, which is continuing to knock for him, he's going to answer the call on a weekly basis. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Let me know down below any of these other players that you guys want me to cover for player profiles. Outside of that, that's it for today's video. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.